Hi, I'm Mark from eReplacementParts.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove and replace the upper shaft on a Ryobi string trimmer. Replacing the upper shaft on your Ryobi string trimmer is a repair that can be a little frustrating for some folks. And that's because there's a couple of points during the repair that can be a little tricky. In this video, we're going to give you a couple of tips that will hopefully make this much easier and show you that this is a repair you can easily do yourself. We'll get started by releasing the shaft from the engine assembly. We'll do that with these two screws. The upper screw will get totally removed. And the lower screw I'll just loosen. With the two screws removed that secure the shaft to the engine assembly, now I can move on to the throttle assembly. These screws I'm just going to loosen at this point. I don't want to take them completely out yet. With the screws on the throttle trigger assembly loosened, now I can go ahead and begin separating the shaft from the engine assembly. I'll just slide the two apart, but I won't be able to slide them completely apart at this point because of the throttle cable and the ignition wires. So what I need to do is just slowly slide the grip and the throttle assembly down the shaft. And as I do this, this will give me enough play in those wires and the throttle cable that I can separate the two. Now I can go ahead and remove the side cover on the throttle assembly. There's a spring behind this cover, so you want to be careful when you do this that you don't lose the spring. So I'll keep pressure on the cover with my thumb until I'm ready to slide the two pieces apart. Okay, now I'll very carefully remove the cover so I don't lose the spring. Now the shaft is free of the throttle assembly, and the last thing I need to do is just slide the remainder of the grip off of the shaft. And the last part of disassembly is to just simply remove the D handle from the shaft. Now we can begin reassembly. Before I start the reassembly, I want to point out a couple of features on the parts because you won't be able to see them well later. First, you'll notice this hole on the side of the shaft. This hole lines up with this round tab on the throttle trigger body. Those two will go together later as we reassemble. Also, you'll notice on the throttle cable, there's a little groove milled in it. That groove will line up with the ridge on the throttle trigger body. Those two will go together just like that, again later in the assembly. Now we can begin reassembly. You'll notice at the base of the grip there's a groove milled. This groove is for the ignition wires and the throttle cable to sit in. I want to orient these into that groove so that when I reassemble it, the wires will go into the throttle assembly first and the throttle cable will sit on top. With the wires in the proper order, now I can go ahead and slide the shaft back into the grip. I want to be careful here that I don't pinch any of the ignition wires. I'll insert the shaft into the grip until the shaft is flush with the end at this point. Now I can begin reassembling the throttle trigger assembly. I'll start by inserting the switch into the housing. You'll notice at the base of the switch there's some little tabs, and these will hold the ignition wires. Just going to use a little screwdriver to slide the wires down into the tabs. Now we can move on to what is definitely the most difficult part of this repair, and that is replacing the trigger. The reason it's hard is because we have to put tension on the trigger spring and hold everything together as we reassemble it. So what I like to do is take the spring and kind of pre-tension it by setting it down into the lower trigger body. Now I can grab the base of the spring with a pair of needle nose pliers and pull the spring back. Now it's a matter of threading the trigger onto the lower post and at the same time inserting the spring into the small hole on the trigger. Like that. Now it's important that I keep downward pressure on the trigger assembly because it's under tension from the spring. Now I can reinstall the safety lever, and now I'm going to shift the pressure on the trigger. I'm going to remove my thumb but hold down very firmly on the trigger with my other hand and install the upper cover. Now I can take the screws and I'll screw them into the housings, but I don't want to make them tight at this point. I still want to leave them loose so that we can adjust the throttle assembly back and forth on the shaft. Now we can go ahead and slide the trigger body and the grip down the shaft to their proper location. If you recall before, we pointed out the hole in the shaft and the tab on the trigger body. The tab will align with the hole in the shaft and hold the trigger assembly at the proper location. So just as before when we took it off, I'll just slowly slide the grip down the shaft, and at some point you will need to slide the shaft into the end of the engine assembly. Just work your way down. There, the trigger assembly locked into the hole on the shaft, and now we know it's in the right location. So I can go ahead and tighten up the screws. Before I tighten up this lower screw, I need to position the throttle cable. Again, if you remember before, we pointed out the groove on the throttle cable. Now I need to insert that groove in between the plastic tabs on either side of the trigger assembly. Just like that. Now we can finish up resecuring the shaft to the engine assembly. First, I'll slide the grip all the way up tight to the throttle assembly. Then slide the shaft back into the engine. Reinsert the alignment screw and tighten it down. And tighten up the clamp screw. And last, we can go ahead and reinstall the D handle. If you forgot to slide the D handle onto the shaft first, like I did, don't worry about it. It's just as easy to install this way. I'll remove the nut and the bolt and slide the handle over the shaft. And now just reattach the fasteners. So as you can see, installing a new upper shaft on your Ryobi string trimmer is definitely a repair you can do yourself. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to leave a comment or ask us a question.